And just a little bit about our people, because we're very unique. You know, when you look at the Germans from Russia, they were a group that for almost 200 years, at least a good 150 years, were in a country where they didn't assimilate. You know, when we think about our country, maybe we think of the Amish, you know, they're kind of separate. Well, the Germans from Russia were very much like that as well, and did not assimilate. And you know, a few things, we picked up a few of the food things that the Russians and Ukrainians had, and they picked up a few of our words, we picked up some of theirs. Of course, that would happen. But essentially, they did stay together and in their own communities. So let me share a little bit about that. In 1763, it was the end of the 7 Years' War, and you guys, I'm sure, have heard about that before. Yeah, I see smiles. Did you study that or something, or you know about it? Anyway, so in Germany, there was no Germany at that time. It was just, you know, like a landlord here and a, you know, earl here or whatever, you know, the different titles that these people would have. And people, you know, lived in this area where they had a common language. They did speak German, but there wasn't the German country per se. And so there had been a German princess who had gone to Russia, and her name was Sophie, and she became the Russian princess, the wife of the future Tsar. And we, of course, know her as Catherine the Great. And in 1763, you know, she had become, if you look at Catherine, she was kind of a scoundrel in some ways because she orchestrated the overthrow of her husband. But she was very smart and very progressive as well. And so she asked, you know, she wanted people to come to settle the steppes, the Russian prairie, where there were nomads roaming and it was not settled. You know, it was a vast, Russia's vast, I mean, it's huge. And so this was an area she wanted to have settled. So she extended an invitation to just about everybody in Europe except for Jews. They were not invited. In fact, they were told no, they weren't included. But it struck home with a lot of the people in southern Germany because this was an area that had been profoundly impacted by the 7 Years' War, and many people had died. And so they were ready for something different in a time of peace. So she invited them, and many of them took her up on it. It was 1763, and she had originally, about 6 months before this, had issued an invitation, and not too many people took her up on it. But then she sweetened the pot. And she said, okay, well, here's what the conditions are. We're going to give you some free land. You'll be able to have free land. You will be able to be tax-free for 30 years. And I would love that. I mean, that would be great. You'd be able to have your own villages. You know, you would be able to stay with your people. You could be in your own villages. You'd have freedom of religion. You'd be able to speak your own languages, elect your own local officials. But here was the really important one that really grabbed people. Your men, your sons, would not have to be in the Russian army. They would be free of conscription. So that appealed to many people. And so there were these recruiters. You know, we think about recruiters for you know, jobs or recruiters for teams. Well, they had recruiters to recruit people to come to Russia. And so many people took her up on it. But in order to be able to take advantage of that, you had to be debt-free, and you had to have all your taxes paid up. So it wasn't just an escape for somebody running away. They had to, you know, be a responsible person. So many people took her up on it. And the journey from Germany over to the area in Russia that they first settled, which is the Volga River, and I'm sure you've heard of the Volga before, you know, huge, you know, importance to the Russian people. The Volga was the area where they were going to be in this area. It took about a year, you know, from the time they started their process to getting through. There were a couple of different routes they could take. Actually, I brought a map along with, and it shows the couple of routes. There was a land route and there was a sea route, and so they both took, you know, quite a while. I suppose the land route took a little bit longer. Okay, here, if you look at this is Germany over here, and these red dots are the, thank you, these are where the people would have come from. You know, if you look at Germany, it's like the southern part of Germany primarily was where they came from, Hesse, the Rhineland area. Frankfurt on Main was the area kind of where my family came from the Hessian area. Anyway, so they left this area, and then they traveled over here to where this is quite red over here. This is along the Volga. So it was about a year. They could either go up around the Scandinavian countries through the, what would it be, the North Sea, I guess, and around the Scandinavian countries, or they could go across land. So you can pass that around, and you guys can take a closer look at that. So, but anyway, it was an arduous trip. There's no question about it. It took a long time to get there. So they get there, and often there's nothing there. I know my family came from a place called Norca, and it was a crown colony, and eventually they did get assistance from the government in building houses, but when they first got there, there was nothing there. And along the Volga, there's two sides, of course. Every river's got two sides. On the west side would be the Bergside, is what they called it. It was the hilly side. And that's where my family, one of their villages was along that area. They had to have like dugouts, like sod houses, that kind of a thing. They had to establish someplace to live. They got there on August 15th in 1767. And if you know anything about Russia, you know within a matter of a couple months, it's going to be very cold. So that's what they had to do. But they did get help eventually from the government, and they had log houses that they helped them to build. On the other side was the meadow side. This was hilly, this was meadow. And I'm probably backwards when you're looking at me, I guess. But anyway, there were eventually about 3,000 villages that were in, German villages that were in Russia. And they weren't all along the Volga. That was the first group that was established. In 1804, Catherine's grandson also issued another invitation, and then people settled along the Black Sea area, in Ukraine, in the Caucasus Mountains and Crimea. So when I hear the stories about Ukraine and Crimea and the trouble they're having between, Ukraine and Russia, it's very pertinent because, these are areas that were German-Russian areas that people settled. To give you an idea quickly what happened, how are we doing time-wise? I want to make sure we have plenty of time. But so they get there, and they had a year. Many people died, and people died throughout that first winter as well. But these are very hardworking people, smart, and very motivated. And what they did was they were able to turn that area along the Volga into a very prosperous, thriving area. They had lots of things happen to them. There was he was really actually kind of a rebel. Pushov, I think is how you say his name, not sure. He's kind of a Russian Cossack rebel who did not like Catherine the Great, wanted to overthrow her, claimed he was actually Peter III, and rounded up a lot of people. And if you talk to a German Russian, they're not going to like this gentleman because, and I say that in quotes, facetiously, this guy was a marauder. He came into German Russian villages, took everything that they had, raped the women, took the children. He was horrible, and so when that name is mentioned with our people, it's kind of a pariah. It'd be like Hitler or something, talking about that kind of a person. But they were able to overcome that and establish these villages. And then, like I said, along the Black Sea, they did as well. So here, think about this. If you're in a country, you're a serf, and there's these Germans. They're not even your nationality. They've come in. They've had special treatment. They're doing quite well. They're making lots of money and, thriving. You're not going to like them, and they did not. And so when Alexander's son, Alexander II, became Tsar, he was the one who freed the serfs. And of course we think, oh, that's fabulous. He was, progressive, forward-thinking. But he's also the one that said to the German Russians, that thing Catherine told you and the thing that my dad told you, that doesn't really work anymore. What was supposed to be forever is now 100 years. So it's been 100 years now, those privileges are up, and you're not going to be able to have those things happen any longer. We're going to have Russian teachers come into your villages. You're going to have to speak Russian. You're going to have to become a member of the Orthodox Church, which was a very, huge thing for many people. And your sons are going to have to be in the army. Your men are going to have to be in the army. So many people, of course, didn't want to have that happen, and that was when the people started coming, leaving Russia and coming to the United States. And in the 1880s, there was a group that came from the Volga area, went out to Sutton, Nebraska, if you know where Sutton's at, and they scouted around and looked at the land. They thought, hey, this looks like a lot like what we have in Russia. This land, it's cold in the wintertime, blistering hot in the summertime. The land looks like it. We could do well here. We could do pretty good. And so at that time, the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, the Burlington Railroad was offering cheap land to people. You know, it was a time of homesteading. You know, there was cheap land. And so this was very appealing. Russia was not the paradise it had been at one time. And so people were starting to look for different things. Then in 1904 and 1905, you have the Russian-Japanese War, which Russia lost miserably. And so on the horizon, people could see there's a lot of dissent going on. There's, you know, Nicholas is a czar at this time. People don't like him. You know, there's rabble rousers that are coming in, stirring up the people. And so some of the German-Russian people could see that the future did not look very well. So my family came to the United States in 1906, which would have been just right after the Japanese-Russian War. One of the reasons, I'm sure, is that my grandfather, the oldest son in the family, had just turned 16, or was going to be turning 16 within a matter of a short time, which of course meant that he was going to be conscripted into the Russian army. Many of those young men never came back. They never came back. And so they were able to, once again, you had to be debt-free, taxes paid before you could leave, which is a lesson to us. You know, I think when I look at my own family, I thought, gosh, I would not have been able to go. But, you know, they were able to come in 1906. And so, you know, you'd had settlers come, you had immigrants come before and then also afterwards. And I can take that, so I don't have to worry about it. Here's the other thing that happened shortly after that. You know, the Russian Revolution happened in what year? Anybody know? This is the same year Nicholas would have been deposed. You know, they had
1917.
Exactly, 1917. Very good, excellent. And so in 1917, of course, then the Bolsheviks come into power, and they start to take everything. You know, the Germans had been loyal citizens. You know, they went, you know, they didn't want to send their sons to the army, but they did. They didn't particularly, you know, want to have these things happen, but the ones that stayed, they were loyal. They were, you know, true to the Tsar. And so after now, here's the Tsar's gone, and these people who had been loyal, they are considered like criminals. So many people have left around that time as well. But then the really hard times come into play in just a few years after that, because in 1920 and 21, the Bolsheviks take everything. The Germans had great crops, and they were, you know, had a great system of storing things away. They were able to, you know, think forwardly and wanted to, you know, always have enough. But the Bolsheviks came in, they took everything. The Germans rebelled and said, no, we don't want to do, you can't have our crops. We worked hard for these. Well, many people were executed. They took them, and then what happened was there's no crops, there's nothing to eat, there's no seeds for the next year. So there was a horrible, horrible famine in 1921. The United States actually is the group that bailed out Russia and saved those people. Thousands, millions of people were dying. They had nothing, no clothes. I mean, they took everything from them. So anyway, you know, I just thank God every day my family was here where they were at, because they were, you know, sitting fine here in the United States, and over there, family members were not. But you know what? Here's the thing. I had never heard of this until I started working at HSGR March 17th, St. Patrick's Day this year. I'd never heard this story. I didn't know about the famine. I didn't know about this stuff. I didn't know about the Russians that came in and raped the women, and, you know, the nomads, the Cossacks that did that. Because when they came to this country, they didn't talk about that. They didn't tell their kids. I have one cousin who's older than me. He said, yeah, Grandma talked to me about that. She did tell me about that. But I'm one of 35 first cousins, and I'm right in the middle of the pack. And they never said a thing to us about that, you know, like the younger ones. We didn't ever hear that.